What would you do if a seemingly normal day turned into a moment you'd never forget? For Barron Trump, what started as a simple flight became an unexpected and chaotic ordeal. A routine trip turned into a storm of tension, public spectacle, and unanswered questions. What would you do if everyone in the room seemed to suddenly turn against you without cause? It all began on an ordinary afternoon at Dallas Love Field Airport. The terminal was alive with its usual rhythm, hurried footsteps, announcements echoing from the loudspeakers, and the hum of conversations from travelers rushing to their gates. But near gate C-12, Barron Trump sat quietly, his tall frame folded into a chair that seemed almost too small for his stature. At just 17 years old, his life was anything but ordinary, yet Barron had mastered the art of staying invisible in public. With his hood pulled up and his phone in hand, he kept his head down, scrolling through the endless feed of social media, blending into the crowd as much as someone like him possibly could. But today, fate had other plans. A sharp voice broke through the ambient noise. "Excuse me, young man," an older gate agent said as he walked toward Barron, his tone laced with suspicion. The man had sharp features and an impatient air about him, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the teenager sitting in the priority boarding area. Something about Barron's calm, almost aloof demeanor seemed to agitate him. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" he asked, his voice cutting through the surrounding chatter. Barron looked up, startled but composed. His expression remained neutral, his voice steady. "Yes, I am. I have a first-class ticket," he replied, his upbringing shining through in his polite tone. Yet, despite his calm demeanor, the gate agent's skepticism only seemed to harden. His eyes flicked over Barron's casual attire, hoodie, sneakers, and phone in hand. Without a word, he extended his hand. "Can I see your ticket?" Barron hesitated, not because he had anything to hide, but because he was no stranger to being singled out for no apparent reason. Still, he handed over the digital boarding pass displayed on his phone. The agent took it, his lips tightening as he read the name aloud. "Barron Trump," he said, pausing for effect, as if the name carried more weight than the ticket itself. Passengers around them began to take notice. Whispers started rippling through the crowd, a low hum of curiosity growing louder with each second. Barron could feel the heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his face neutral, refusing to let his frustration show. The agent glanced at the name again before turning and muttering something to a colleague. Moments later, he returned, now flanked by a supervisor whose expression was equally stern. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," the supervisor said flatly. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Barron frowned, his voice still calm but firm. "What issue? I booked this ticket weeks ago." The supervisor gave no real explanation, only a curt response. "We're handling it, sir. Please step away from the gate." Reluctantly, Barron obeyed, his tall frame moving aside to lean against a nearby column. His eyes scanned the bustling terminal as other passengers began boarding without issue. Yet he stayed where he was, feeling the stares of those around him like a weight pressing on his shoulders. Some pulled out their phones discreetly, or not so discreetly, recording the unfolding situation. Minutes felt like hours. The murmurs grew louder, the weight of the gate agent's scrutiny heavier with each passing moment. Barron shifted uncomfortably, wondering what could possibly be taking so long. Was it his last name? Was this about who he was? Or was it something else entirely? He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the thought gnawed at him. This didn't feel like a routine security check. This felt personal. The supervisor returned, his expression unyielding. "We're unable to verify your identity through the system," he announced, his voice firm but measured. "Do you have another form of identification?" Barron furrowed his brow, exasperation beginning to creep into his otherwise calm demeanor. "My passport is in my carry-on bag," he said. "You didn't even check it." For a moment, the supervisor hesitated, clearly thrown off by the logical response. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "This isn't just about your ID," he said. "There are procedures we need to follow." Barron's tone remained polite but carried an edge of disbelief. "What procedures? I've flown through this airport dozens of times without an issue." The gate agent from earlier chimed in, his voice carrying a defensive tone. "We've had some irregularities lately. You're not being singled out." But the look in his eyes betrayed him, and Barron wasn't buying it. Neither were a few passengers nearby. A woman holding a toddler on her hip finally spoke up. "What's the problem? He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board." The supervisor ignored her, his focus locked on Barron. "You'll need to wait here while we conduct a further review," he said. "If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate the matter." "Escalate?" Barron echoed, his patience wearing thin. "What exactly are you escalating? I've done nothing wrong." As if on cue, 2 airport security officers appeared, their presence only intensifying the tension. Barron's chest tightened, not from fear, but from disbelief at how far this had gone. The officers flanked him, their serious expressions drawing even more attention. Phones were now pointed in his direction, recording every second of the unfolding drama. "Sir, please come with us," one of the officers said, his tone measured but firm. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Barron exhaled deeply, his jaw tightening as he grabbed his carry-on bag. "Fine," he said curtly, following them toward a small, sterile room near the gate. Behind him, the whispers and camera flashes followed like a storm cloud. Inside, the room felt colder, heavier, the tension palpable. The officers motioned for him to sit at a table as one began flipping through his passport. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Barron broke it, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous." One of the officers glanced up. "We're just following protocol, son." That word, protocol, felt like an empty excuse. Barron shook his head in frustration. "How does this happen on a flight I booked weeks ago? What kind of protocol is this?" But no one had a real answer. The officers exchanged glances as if trying to justify the situation to themselves. Meanwhile, outside the room, the crowd of onlookers grew larger, their murmurs louder. And then came the thought Barron couldn't ignore. What if this wasn't about security at all? What if this was about who he was? As the minutes dragged on, the situation spiraled further into absurdity. Barron was no stranger to the spotlight, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of attention anyone wanted. Public humiliation with no clear explanation. And the worst part? The storm had only just begun. As the questions piled up and the officers in the room probed further, Barron could feel something heavier than just suspicion. It was an unspoken bias lingering in the air, suffocating, palpable. Each minute stretched longer than the last. But what Barron didn't know was that, miles away, someone else was already on her way, and she wasn't happy. In the back seat of a sleek black SUV weaving through Dallas traffic, Melania Trump sat upright, composed. Her phone rested lightly in her manicured hand, her expression calm, at least at first. She had planned a quick, unannounced visit to surprise her son at the airport after his flight. It was supposed to be simple. But as her phone buzzed incessantly with incoming notifications, texts, social media alerts, her calm began to crack. Concern flickered across her face, her lips pressing into a firm line as her sharp eyes scanned the screen. One message made her pause. Something's going on with Barron at the airport. People are posting videos. Her chest tightened. With a swipe, she opened a short clip. It showed Barron surrounded by security personnel, being escorted away from the gate. Her fingers moved swiftly, replaying the video once, twice. Each replay deepened the crease in her brow. "Driver, please hurry," she said, her voice calm but carrying a sharp edge that didn't invite debate. The driver nodded, stepping harder on the gas. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Barron sat alone in a sterile, cramped room, his eyes fixed on the blank wall in front of him. The cold air conditioning hummed faintly, the only sound in the suffocating silence. The officers had left to verify his credentials, leaving him there to stew in his growing frustration. His hands rested on the table, fingers unconsciously tapping out a soft, repetitive rhythm. He didn't even realize he was doing it. It was instinctual, a release of pent-up tension. The door opened abruptly, snapping Barron out of his thoughts. The same supervisor who had interrogated him earlier stepped inside, avoiding eye contact. "We're still working on clearing up the situation," he said, his tone measured, his words rehearsed. "It shouldn't be much longer." Barron's patience was wearing thin. "How much longer?" he demanded, his voice sharp now, his frustration no longer veiled. "You've had all my information for almost an hour." The supervisor hesitated, then mumbled something vague about procedures before retreating, the door clicking shut behind him. Barron exhaled loudly, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't just about a ticket or a misstep in ID anymore. No, this felt like something deeper, something personal. Outside the terminal, Melania's SUV pulled up to the curb. The vehicle came to a smooth stop.